So I wish I had my slides on Jack Lumber's prototyping process. We have a... Actually, okay, I'm gonna go back. I'm really annoyed by most game studios that they hide their production process behind kind of like this curtain of we can't show mistakes and early versions of games that weren't fun because it'll make us look bad. We have this whole... we did 9 prototypes to get Jack Lumber to the point where we found fun, and I showed the first 1 through 8 and how terrible they were, and kind of little snippets of what we thought. Like, we always thought we were so close to being at finding fun, and we were like, oh, we just have to tweak this one little variable, and then we were so far off. And the story was that we created all these prototypes, and then someone kind of had this aha moment that they told me. They said, what would we were doing all this stuff where we were chopping logs on the ground and it's conveyor belts and terrible. And then someone said, what would a supernatural lumberjack do? And I had this idea of stopping time and doing a line drawing mechanic. And we threw out 7 months worth of work and then built a prototype in 6 days. And then we showed it to people who had been playing all of our prior stuff. And they said, oh my God, this is 10 times better. And you can never really know, okay, now I've found this is definitely fun, and if I spend 8 more months and hundreds of thousands of dollars on this, I will be successful. You can never know that, but there's at least a glimmer of like understanding, oh, that was really fun to do, and I'm gonna keep going down this path, that you kind of clicks, and you just have to have a gut feeling and go with it.
Alright, Joe, you want to talk?
Thank you for mentioning, thank you for mentioning the business part. Because guess what? You get paid. It can be, art for art's sake is wonderful, but if it doesn't pay the bills, you are just as much as any single starving artist that there's been throughout the centuries. So I like getting paid. My dad was a CPA, so I understand. I'm on the film side, but for some reason Dad on the game side. I understand the part about getting paid, and that's something that everyone should be fairly aware of.
If you don't mind me jumping in, you talked about Ichiro and his feedback. We worked with him extensively, and he's done talks where he shows this Venn diagram, and I always remember this Venn diagram, and it's games that I want to make, and there's a big circle, and then it's games that will make me money, and there's a tiny slice of overlap, and he's like, that's where we operate. Just right in that tiny little thing.
I do want to recognize Gavino, even though he is an attorney, nothing he says should be considered legal advice, of course. I think you actually like to say that. But you did say about how business sometimes gets a bad rap, and some people think it's cool to be anti-business, but being anti-lawyer is another thing too. You might actually need one.
You will. You definitely will need one at one point. And so you want to be in good terms, right? You don't want to be known as that guy who hates lawyers.
Anyone other questions? I'll be Geraldo Rivera.
Thank you all for speaking. So with the Kickstarter campaigns, would you say that you need a community before you actually start your campaign, or does the Kickstarter campaign create a community?
Well, I'll say for sure in our case, we kind of rushed into it. We didn't do much building of a community beforehand, and we also kind of relied on kind of an assumption that we had, which is that when we were turning on our Kickstarter, we were going to have 40,000 people watching. We didn't. It was actually just technical issue. We were supposed to have 40,000 people watching, but because we did not, we didn't have enough initial buzz, and that's really important to a Kickstarter campaign, is to have a lot of initial buzz. Luckily, we had always planned to kind of take whatever progress we made on the Kickstarter and roll it over to our own site and keep it ongoing. We'd only really planned to fund the first few episodes up front and then get more later, because we knew people wouldn't understand how much it actually cost. Just with any game that's out there now, and then the Kickstarter game has become, you have to get part of the way through to show people something exciting, which, I mean, it's a little different than what Kickstarter was meant to be, I think, but you have to realize that you can't ask for, $3 million if your game doesn't look like super AAA, like awesome.
I agree. We asked for 40,000 for Discourse's Kickstarter, and I don't think we would have made that if we hadn't had it released prior original games that at least some people had heard of, and we had been in a humble bundle or what have you. So we did as much as we could to try to gather people who had expressed interest in our studio, built a mailing list and our Twitter followers, and just kind of like going back through people we've worked with in the past and friends and family, just getting all those lists all ready for day one, notification blast. But if you didn't have any of those connections, I think you'd have a very tough time with that first day. And if you don't have a good first day, I have this theory that Kickstarter is like the restaurant effect. I guess I made that up, but basically when you walk down the street and you look into a restaurant and there's no one sitting in the restaurant, you think, wow, there must be some terrible thing wrong with that restaurant. But if you see a line out the door of the restaurant, you're like, wow, maybe I should just get in this line before I even figure out what the hell this restaurant is. So it's just this idea that other people, like the hive mind, they've decided this is good, this is bad. And so if you come to a Kickstarter and it's already on its way to success, you feel validated in your thoughts on the Kickstarter, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna also get in on this upward trend. But if you see just a stagnant, wasteland of emptiness in the beginning, there's very little chance that it'll suddenly pick up in the end. So.
Actually, along those lines, I have something, Chad can correct me if I'm wrong, but Indie Van Game Jam got on Steam Greenlight, which is another way of getting attention through democracy. Yeah. But as I understand, reading the comments, some people just did not get the idea. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong, it's if you buy it, you get all episodes that are filmed, but then all the games that you guys made on the way to each of the locations. So there are a whole bunch of people that are saying, one, this isn't a game, and two, they're like, these are just prototypes of people just banging it out over a van ride. Who would want to play those?
Yep. It actually is also 7, those original game prototypes we have. We also spent a lot of time while we were editing the episodes improving them and adding more levels and adding more features and doing all the crazy things that we thought of in the van that we didn't get to do because of the time restriction. But yeah, it was all about the first appearances. So when we first opened it up, we didn't have like a splashy enough graphic that summed it up like instantly at once, and people were really confused. And we were at Screw Attack Gaming Conference while we were doing it. So it was really hard for me because I was like still trying to check all the comments and everything, but I was still trying to interact with everyone walking by and showing them the game. And it's a weird economy where like the people at the conference are having such a blast playing our game because we're showing them the games and they're seeing games and they're actually, we make sure that we're showing them right at the funnest part of the games. So like, oh yeah, this is awesome. What do you guys do? Great. And so like every flyer we handed out, we knew it was like it was a green light vote or it was just a fan or whatever. So we were like in the midst of like trying to do that and create this magical graphic that showed what a confusing concept was clearly. So.
I have a two-part question. The first one is for Hellfire Games. When you tried to find a URL for hardcore, did you find that it was already taken?
I think by something other than games, right? Hardcore can mean lots of things.
That would never occur to me.
I think if we'd done a Google search on hardcore, we would not have chosen that name.
And the second.
I don't think we may never had the URL.
No, I don't get the URL.
You're right, it's something you don't want to Google.
I remember you gave me my first check from your old checkbook was Hardcore Games, and I had to fucking pay that in at the bank. Thanks for that. Thanks, Gavino.
We can't get away with it. You have to this day we continue to have problems with it because the way it works is you file, and this is why you really want to get these things correct the first time, right? So we had incorporated under Hardcore Software Inc. And the way it works is you then tell the Secretary of State, oops, we made a mistake, we really want this other name. So you have an amendment. But your name in the Secretary of State's database will always be that first name, right? So when we were dealing with Sony, the very first interactions we had with Sony when we were getting test kits caused a problem because we were now Hellfire Games, but the Secretary of State in Texas said we were hardcore software. And it was, I mean, it was like really, I remember the email from one of the Sony reps, it was like, are we just giving dev kits to anyone now?
The second part of my question was completely different. It's about Kickstarter campaigns. I've heard sometimes it can be the effort of following up on all of your customers, your investors, becomes such a logistical mountain of work in itself. You may even have to hire a person full-time just to deal with all of that, managing the logistics of keeping all of your investors happy. What do you think about that?
Investors, first of all, that'd probably be the first word to address.
Yeah, if you look at, if you remember the slide that I had for Pixel Dash, that girl on the right, that was her job. That was her whole full-time job while the campaign was going on, as well as afterwards. And for her, she said it was an 80-hour week just doing that, because they were reasonably popular because the Road Rash connection. And then afterwards, it's still 20 hours out of her day ongoing. It's just, yep, we're still working on it. Yep, we're fixing bugs, you know. And the other people that we visited, Stoic, mirrored that same thing. Alex saying, you know, it's crazy. It's like all these people have a voice, and they think that you should be listening to them. Like, not just the crowd, but you should be listening to them personally. So yeah, sometimes it is hard when you have that many people, but you just have to stay your course and let people know why.
Yeah, we got a lot of advice that said, you know, however much work you think it's going to be to do a Kickstarter during that month, double it, triple it. So yeah, we had a full-time community manager that we hired freelance to help us out. We got him ramped up a couple months before, and he did 5-10 hours a week before, and then went up to 40 during the campaign. And then everyone on the team actually stopped developing and was doing only content updates and only fixes and writing and imagery for the Kickstarter. And I put in definitely more than 40 hours during the weeks doing the Kickstarter. There's something else I was going to say about that. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, it was a crazy grind, and I'm not sure we would do another Kickstarter. I think there's other issues with doing like a back-to-back second Kickstarter, because I feel like you use a little goodwill in order to ask for money for a Kickstarter, so you can't just, once you do a game, you're like, okay, next time we're going to fund it this way. I feel like you kind of have to let that simmer for a while. So I don't know if we're ever going to do another, but I think it was a really good learning experience for us. And oh yeah, the other thing I was going to say is that we expected people to kind of be pissy assholes, right? So we kind of mitigated that by saying, we're not doing stretch goals. That compromises the vision of our game. This is the game we're making, and if you want to come on board, then you can do it. And then we said, we're going to be doing 3 times a week updates during the Kickstarter, and then after we're going to do monthly video updates. And no one's complained about frequency of updates because we told them what we're going to do. But if you just kind of like say, hey, it's coming soon, and then you wait 6 weeks, and people start to bitch on the comments. So I guess we kind of like cracked the whip early and said, here's kind of what you're coming on board. And you know, we want your feedback and all that stuff, but here's kind of what you should expect. And I think that helped a lot.
Managing expectations, all right.
Thank you.
Hey guys, so a couple of things that y'all said kind of just made me think of what I would love to hear more tip of the spear industry guys talking about, which is kind of the evolution of where we're going with this type of company structure for being able to crowdfund and pull that kind of resource in. You know, we're starting to see that already. You have to have a company that's just recently done something really, you know, what was your last thing that we did, and what, you know, how is your prototype already? You did, you know, they show that the Kickstarters that are just knocking it out of the park, they had 5 months of heavy development before the Kickstarter even launched, and you're getting all these people hired, you're planning all these things. You know, you look at Portalarium or Star Citizen, you know, that really knocked it out of the park, and you look at all the work that they did before they even brought all that stuff up. If you think, like, I don't know, what I'm eager to see is what is going to be replacing that, or what is going to be the change of Kickstarter, or whatever is going to be the next thing that is the leading crowdfunding thing that allows people to know what's going on before that, and kind of allows more of that, and takes away that hive mentality. Because I'm also like, if I see something on day 13 it's not already on its up drive, I'm kind of like, oh well, yeah, you know, and so you kind of already kind of judge it. So maybe there needs to be a change to that type of system, or something else, something better than Kickstarter.
So what's the future of indie financing? Can we just go down the line with thoughts?
You go ahead.
Okay, so Hellfire has had no experience with Kickstarter, so I can't speak as to that. We are conventional, standard. You know, you start off with angels, and if you get bigger, then you move to VCs, and if you go beyond that, you know, God willing, you IPO or something, right? But that's not what you're asking about. You're asking about, you know, grassroots type funding deals, and I'll just be very frank with you, I don't have any experience with that, so I couldn't guess as to what the future is, but these guys do.
Yeah, maybe somebody in this room is going to make the next better Kickstarter. You never know. Yeah,
Well, you just interviewed 10 studios or more. Well, how are they all getting funded? How's that working?
All right. So yeah, everyone actually funded themselves differently, right? I think it's been diverse in the past, and it's still going to be diverse in the future. Each system comes with its own pros and cons. One of the new ones I've seen that's interesting is Patreon. If you haven't heard of it, it's basically an ongoing contribution where you're like, oh, you make music? Well, I'll give you $1 every month to produce a song every month. That's new and novel, and I think it could work similar for video games, but I mean, I don't think anyone really can just do one thing. I don't think Kickstarter is going to evolve into something other than early access, but I think each of these new paths just opens up a new option. Like Minecraft was all about just early access, giving it away up front, watching the game evolve. I think more people will do that, and I think Steam and other companies are making that more viable by allowing for that and getting the frameworks in place. But other than that, I don't think it's going to change too much in the near term, or even the next 5 or 10 years.
So I would say, I think most people know this, but it's kind of become more apparent, is that the game industry is a hit-driven industry. And I think studios who have established themselves or made a track record for themselves, who've kind of capitalized on some prior successes, can continue with that success and using notoriety to kind of keep themselves up in the in the public's eye. But I think it's definitely going forward more of a IP-centric, hit-driven type of thing. Like if you look at a game like Super Hot, you have a game jam game that just kind of caught on like just insanely huge within one day, and then they were able to capitalize on those eyeballs and all the press and all that by doing a Kickstarter, and then now they're coming out for all these consoles and all that. So I think you kind of have to kind of play the game until you have some kind of your 15 minutes, and then if you know the business side well enough that you can properly capitalize off of or are prepared to kind of capture those users and make sure that people who are interested in your game can hear about the next thing you make, then you can continue kind of building that one-time thing into a more long-term series of successes, and to kind of again mitigate the fact that not every game will be a success. So you kind of have to have multiple things going on and not be fully dependent on 2-3 year development cycles and hoping that that thing will be profitable, because it's not always. You just have to watch out for you have to keep in mind that not everything will be successful, and you have to have other means of making, having income.
Okay, so follow on that real quick. How valuable would it to be to any of you who, if more people in general knew how the sausage was made, like how games get paid for and how they handle it? Because when Kickstarter first came about, people were like, we don't have to deal with the publisher system anymore. Those people are obnoxious, they don't know anything about games. Well, as it turns out, the rest of the public knows even less, and they're more obnoxious, and there's more of them.
Patreon is a great example of being more creator-centric way of funding things, right? Because I think Patreon works really well for single-person teams, and it's like, I've been doing this, I'm really prolific, I continue making webcomics every week, and I'm gonna go broke, so you should help me by paying $1 every month, right? So that works really well, but I think a Patreon for a 30-person team is just laughable. I don't think it extends in that way, so again, that's very like how the sausage is made. You're really funding a person, not a product, and you're hoping that by funding this person, they continue making products that you like because you like one of their prior products. But yeah, Kickstarter, I mean, you kind of have to show your face, and like people like give advice on how to do a Kickstarter video, and it's like, oh, make it about your process and about you, and less about the product, or like not just a trailer for your game, but really a trailer for your process. And so I guess there's more and more of people seeing how games are made instead of it just being a commodity product.
If I could just add this really quick. I mean, obviously, by the nature of what I'm doing right now, I think that educating people can only be more and more beneficial. Because right now, you have a mass of people who think they have an idea of how the game is made, or they program, so they just say things like, oh, it's as easy as just doing this. So the more that you educate people and just let them know, the easier it becomes. And it's everyone won't learn, but at least you'll capture more and more of the audience each time.
So I got a question for everybody in the group. Coming from working at a studio full time, outside of getting laid off, unfortunately, as Jeff was saying earlier, what do you think is the most opportune time to take the dive into becoming your own studio?
For me, it was being able to be financially secure enough to convince my wife. So that was it. As soon as I convinced my wife, I was gone. I timed it with the release of our latest product so that it was an easy transition. But as soon as you're ready to work, really long hours or dive fully into the business and be prepared and be able to actually sustain yourself, I think it's fine.
I'll say what I think is the time not to do it, which is when you are working a profitable job and you get really excited and come up with the idea of a product that you want to make, and then you say, okay, I'm going to quit my job right now and start working on this product. I think that's a terrible, terrible plan. And I mean, in my case, myself and a co-founder worked for about 14 months while continually talking about what we were going to do and what we were planning on doing until we were actually just kind of saving almost every dollar that came in at our full-time jobs. So, and waiting until we each had enough to contribute to the initial kind of seed of the company to self-fund it. So I think doing everything you can to keep if you're working a full-time job, to keep that paycheck coming in while you still, you can even incorporate and you can get started on a lot of things before you go and sever that cord. And I think a lot of people also think they either have to be at their company or quit. And there's, depending on how useful you are at your company, you can convince your boss or bosses to switch to part-time, which is actually, I think, the best of both worlds, is to continue doing what you were doing, but to kind of ramp up. And it means that you, again, have a longer runway to do what you want to do, and you have less risk. And there's also some, I think, mental, psychological factors to going from being fully employed to waking up in the morning and sitting down at your computer and saying, okay, now I'm in charge, what the hell do I do? And that's really difficult, and a lot of people get depressed when their velocity slows down from kind of like nights and weekends work, and then they switch to full-time, and they realize they can't do things 5 times as fast now that they have 5 times the amount of time. So it's totally different, and there was a good talk about that recently, about working nights on an indie project and how you feel really successful every time you work on something is because you have 8 hours during the day thinking about what you're going to do that night. And when you remove that amount of pre-thought and just you're constantly developing, you actually feel a lot worse about what you do because you don't have a lot of that pre-roll getting ready to think about what you do, and you're not that as effective. Anyway, there's a whole talk of just that.
Pretty much going to agree with you mostly. You need to have a comfortable amount of money saved up to start a business. You need your own money to start. And in truth, we actually had started and formed hardcore software while still being employed. And in fact, we developed the iPhone game in spare time while still being full-time employed. But it was the layoff that pushed it into being, all right, we're going to take a full plunge and go full-time and do it.
Yeah, and I think Jeff is right. Sometimes there's just like some external factor that pushes you into it, and then afterwards you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? And then once you're on your feet, you're like, oh, I wish I had done this earlier. I wish there had been this action that caused me to do this earlier. But the one thing I will say to Jeff and Alex's points are, if you are working as an indie on your own time, and you're also employed at the same time, make sure you don't have a contract that says you can't do that, right? Because it would be terrible for you to start your own company only to find that you get a cease and desist order from your former employer saying, hey, that all of according to your contract, everything you did now belongs to us.
That's why everyone should be working to abolish non-competes. I think they're completely stifling in the industry.
All right, who's next? Patrick.
Alright. I was going to make a joke earlier about the Kickstarter, about, the restaurant thing, and I was just thinking about the potato salad. Yeah, obviously,
There's definitely a joke there in the potato salad.
Yeah, I just couldn't figure out a taste for one. But actually, I was more interested in, there you go. I was actually thinking, I worked on my own personal projects, tried to look at, the future of them. And I was more curious on what that sparked, where that point was, where, pessimism has to come in. Because you're working on a realistic project, and failure has to be an option, at least in your head, just so you can plan against it. Where's that point where your project you said, hey, I'm gonna keep this going, and I'm really gonna finish this out, and what you've proven to do, which I think is really interesting.
Let's see. I guess we kind of set ultimatums for ourselves where when we started, we knew exactly how much time we had based on the money that we contributed to the company. And we said, okay, we can develop our first game and we're going to have to ship it by this point, and we're just going to go full bore. And if it doesn't do that well, like if it doesn't hit this certain bar, we're just going to stop. And so, but we needed to get to ship point in order to figure that out. I think there's a whole different sub-question, which is like in design, when do you go down a path and then realize you hit a wall and then have to back up? Like when do you actually give up on a branch in your design?
Right.
I don't know which one you're talking about, business or design.
More in the sense, like, what's led to your success? Like you have a successful product, but at the same time, you have to have a moment in the product where you're just like, I don't know about this. Like, this is gonna, why am I doing this? Everyone has that.
I think everyone here would agree about like founder's dilemma. I think everyone knows like the whole, staying up at night and wondering whether you're doing something really terribly wrong with your company. I'm sure everyone has a comment about that.
So for us, we actually have one project that we ended up deciding to just put on the shelf, and it was mainly because when we were showing it to people, we couldn't get them to respond to it. And we made a few changes, we made changes, we kept trying, and it just wasn't getting the response that we'd hoped for. And at that point, we also had this other idea of that we'd had from the beginning. It was in the back of our minds, which was the indie band game jam. And we were like, all right, you know what? Let's just work on this other thing first. Let's do that. We probably won't return to this other thing, but if we do, it's there at the same state, whatever. There's no reason to put bad money, put good money into bad. right? If it's not going to become something, we just have to recognize that now, and we just set a very hard cutoff point of, okay, at this date we can start doing the journey, the van jams. If it gets to that point, it's not fun yet, and we haven't figured anything out, and it's just it, that's done. But I would say try to finish something. I mean, every now and then. It's a good morale boost at least.
Yeah, that's actually a thing that a lot of people work on 3/4 of a project and never get through the last quarter, because the last quarter is actually very unfun. The polish and ship and distribute and all the other things that are required to ship a game. So when I look at indie projects and portfolios of people send me a portfolio to work at Owlchemy Labs, and I look and they see they have 4 games but they never shipped or completed anything, that's a really big red flag, because it takes a lot of commitment and a lot of drive to actually get through that last slog of game development, and if you've done that, that shows that you really have commitment.
So let me just give you the worst thing that I think you can happen to any business owner, any entrepreneur, is to have a mild failure. Because you have a mild failure and you think, okay, just a little bit more money and I can turn this into a better, whatever, into a better product, into a better game, into whatever business, and then you start chasing. And if you don't turn it around right away, then you start looking at it like, well, I've already invested this much, and I'm supposed to put in another $5,000. And then before you know it, you've sunk a lot of good money up the bat. And your question, the way I see it from a business perspective, is when do you know that cutoff? And when there's nothing you can do to mitigate that damage, when there's nothing you can do to turn around, you'll know it. You'll say, okay, you know what, this is a failure. And sometimes, and the hardest time will be when that is your baby. Like that's your project, this is a game that you wanted to design since you were 12 years old. And god damn it, you want everyone to enjoy it. But it's a business failure, right? Nobody wants to buy it. And that's when you have to, do a gut check and say, hey, I'm going to move on to something else, something that is profitable. We've put away, Hellfire has shelved games that we thought, this would be a great game. Boy, this would be, we could make this game, it would be a fun game, everyone would love it, we'd make $1 million, but we can't get the traction on it, and you just have to give up and you have to move on to it.
Yeah, we dropped a game early when we started it on the iPhone, and this was before the App Store had opened, so there were no apps, but we were building the tech, and we thought, it'd be cool, is online poker game for the iPhone. But competition can be scary, and we dropped it because the App Store launched, and people like Apple had a poker game ready for launch on day 1. So, and there was a second one on launch day that was ported from BlackBerry. So we dropped it in fear of competition and being behind. But since then, I've changed. I'm no longer afraid of competition. I don't care how big they are. Thank you. I don't care how big they are, how many people that company has. I believe I can do it better, and you have to.
Yeah, I was wondering, I was going back to something you said earlier about pretty much having all your eggs in one basket when it comes to development. On the film side, if I'm asked, if I present a good idea, and the producer, director, whoever likes it, oh, that's cool, what else you got? It's the what else you got that kills a lot of us. So after getting burned by the great idea, I want to do it, what else you got? That what else you got is telling that person that asked the question that, hey, you have a good idea, can you do it again? Are you really worth investing in something else? Are you consistent? Are you going to consistently make money for me? That's what investors are really interested in. Not just give you this, here's $5,000. Five. Can I invest $2 million and can you make that 40? That's what a lot of people don't realize. So I understand on the film side, but do you guys run up against that from investors?
From investors or publishers? Well, from investors, it's a different story, but from publishers, I'll tell you what we hear a lot. Great idea, let's see some more, right? And there's an old saying among attorneys who do business deals, which is the investors always say yes until they say no, right? And it's very easy for a publisher to say, hey, that's awesome, that's a great idea on paper. Let's see a prototype, or let's see a vertical slice, or whatever, And all that time that you feel like, oh, I've got a great deal, all I have to do is make this prototype, vertical slice, whatever. That producer is talking to 20 other people saying the same thing to them. What else you got? Let me see it. Because it's not costing the producer any money, right? It's costing you a lot of money. So you could be going down this rabbit trail where you're, putting all your money into a project to make a prototype that no one's going to ever pick up. So that's what I see on the video side. I don't know that other people have seen something different, but I see that a lot on the video side, which is, oh, that's great, love it, show me more. Show me more, and it's the show me more that kills you in video games.